Chapter 10, The Book of Kin and a Family Chronicle. In 2002, Delia Publishers issued the new book in the Ringing Cedars series entitled Rodavaya Kniga, or the Book of Kin, in which it advised its readers. Our publishing house has taken the idea of a Book of Kin to heart. As we were getting this book ready for press, we decided to set at once about publishing a blank Book of Kin for you to fill in and thereby keep a record of your own family chronicle. Not long after Delia published this family chronicle in 2003, the Ruski Dom publishing house put out a book under the title Semenaya Letopis, a family chronicle. One of its compilers was Archimandrite Tikhon Shevkunov. At the front of the book were featured guests forewords by Russian President Vladimir Putin and Alexei II, Patriarch of Moscow, and all of the Russias. I'm going to read all the footnotes now. Delia Publishers, the current publishers of the Russian edition of the Ringing Cedars series, located in St. Petersburg, and Moscow. The quotation cited did not appear in the English edition of the Book of Kin. Ruski Dom, which means Russian house, the name of A publishing house in Moscow related to the Russian Orthodox Church, and B, a monthly magazine it publishes. Archimandrite Tikhon sits on the magazine's editorial board. Archimandrite Tikhon Shevkunov, Father Superior of the Retensky Monastery in Moscow, sometimes described as the spiritual advisor to President Putin. A family chronicle is not just a simple story about a few human destinies or even about a whole family. It tells the story of an entire nation. The destiny of Russia and the history of families over successive generations. Such knowledge is indispensable for each citizen of Russia to become aware of his roots and his role in the history of our great motherland. Vladimir Putin, President of Russia. The atmosphere of the family and home, relations with one's relations, memories of one's forebears, and the raising of one's descendants. All this has tremendous implications for the moral strengthening of the individual and, consequently, of the nation. It is no coincidence that it is said among many different peoples that love for one's motherland begins at home. That's Alexei II, Patriarch of Moscow, and all of the Russians. The first one to put forward this idea was Anastasia, quoted from Book 6, Chapter 10. Just a few days will go by, and millions of fathers and mothers in many a land will begin writing their Book of Kin, filling in it pages with their own hand. There will be a vast multitude of them, these books of kin, and all of them will contain the truths which began in the heart for their children. There will be no room in these books for artifice or guise. Before them all the lies of history will fall. We shan't go into details as to how Ruski Dom followed the example of Delia, or who was responsible. The important thing is that the implementation of the idea is the implementation of the idea itself. Now we can see that this idea has the support of the president, the patriarch, and the chairman of the State Duma, who presented copies of a family chronicle to school children on Knowledge Day. Footnotes: State Duma, lower chamber of the Russian National Parliament, corresponding to the House of Commons in the United Kingdom and Canada, or the House of Representatives in America, Australia, and New Zealand. Knowledge Day is the 1st of September, a traditional start of the Russian school year. Now, what are the poor slanderers to do? Include the president, the patriarch, and the chairman of the State Duma in their list of sectarians, along with the former president of the Ukraine who signed a decree regarding family farms granting Ukrainians not 1 but 2 hectares of land each. And we must not forget Governor Anastasia, who during an interview on NTV said of Anastasia's followers, "The future of the country lies with them." He has also encouraged his civil service staff to acquire land and set up their own family domains. Nor Governor Tuliv of the Kemerovo region, who has granted land for a settlement. Nor the Supreme Mufti of Russia, Talgat Tajudin, who responded to a question by a Sotvorany Studios correspondent as to what he thought of the Ringing Cedars series as follows. "I love these books. I'll read them and get a great deal out of them. I feel that reading these books helps strengthen man's faith in God. After all, we need to nourish our faith in God day by day. But for that, it is not only our eyes that must open, more importantly, our heart must be open. Besides, our heart has been given to us for to love. And Vladimir Migre's books help us to love God. He conveys this truth to people through the words of Anastasia. Perhaps theologians may have some reservations, perhaps some will just call it a hypothesis, but faith in God, and especially love for God, is something that starts growing bit by bit, and afterward becomes immeasurable. And long before we get to the next world, right here in this world, man can become happy. And the Ringing Cedars series helps us to do this. Bunch of footnotes. Ridiculous amount of footnotes. Dmitry Fedorovich Ataskov, governor of the Saratov region on the middle reaches of the Volga River. NTV, abbreviation for some Russian word that means independent television, a national private TV network created in 1993, which on its internet site boasts more than 120 million viewers. I'm on the Toliv, governor of the Kemerovo region in Siberia on the Tom River, a tributary of the Ob, just to the east of Novosibirsk, and Talgat Tajudin, Supreme Mufti, spiritual leader of Russian Muslims, formerly known as the chairman of the Central Spiritual Directorate of Muslims of Russia and the European nations of the Commonwealth of Independent States. Hey, on the eve of these events, evidently under pressure of ridiculously loud trucks on the highway. Oh my god. On the eve of these events, evidently under pressure of the machinations and fear-mongering of these same anti-sectarians, one Orthodox archbishop, I shall not give his name so as to not immortalize him, signed a letter threatening to excommunicate from the church anyone who reads or distributes the Ringing Cedars books. I don't know that this is a good place to read. It's loud as fuck. I'm gonna keep fucking reading though. This would mean that the Archbishop would excommunicate the Patriarch himself, who has supported the idea in creating a family chronicle containing his and the President's signed forewords. Even if the Patriarch has never even held any of my books in his hand, that's not the point. It's not the paper with the printed texts of the books, after all, that's important, but the ideas set forth within them. Now that one of the ideas has been approved, I am convinced that it won't be long before others will be granted official state support. But in the meantime, So perhaps it is time we drew the attention of our law enforcement agencies to just who these so-called anti-sectarians really are. But what methods or machinations do they operate, hiding so conveniently beneath the vaulted ceilings of Russia's Orthodox Church? Evidently, they are not there for prayers, the fomenting of interreligious discord, the discrediting of government agencies. That's what they're really up to. And it would be foolish to even suppose that some group of anti-sectarians is that strongly concerned about my personal spiritual development. Their actions, rather, are testimony to their carrying out orders to stop any positive transformations from taking place in Russia, an illustration of their ideology. An illustration of their ideologically based diversionary tactics may be seen in the following example as well. The Jewish question. Recently, for the umpteenth time already, over the past millennium, passions have been inflamed over the Jewish question. There has been more and more talk about the spread in both Europe and Russia of extremist views, including anti-Semitism. The European Jewish Congress has linked this situation with the group of Muslims populated in European countries which are, they say, aggressively anti-Jewish. But there are many concrete historical examples testifying to the fact that aggression can be deliberately provoked, and this is now actively being pursued by certain circles. The provokers may even come from the ranks of the Jews themselves. One has the impression that some kind of order has been received regarding the organization of pogroms. Jewish pogroms are very profitable to somebody, and I'm talking about financial profit. Extremist organizations do not derive any financial benefit from pogroms. Pogroms. Rather, they suffer losses, but these pogroms offer a palpable benefit to countries where Jewish members of the financial oligarchy flee to legalize their multi-billion-dollar incomes and obtain international immunity from prosecution. And for the sake of such financial benefit, they are ready to subject to abuse ordinary and utterly harmless Jews living on Russian territory. This has happened over and over again in the annals of the long-suffering Jewish people. What's the point of a pogrom? The logic is simple. Public opinion is turning against the oligarchs, the financial magnates, as never before. According to government statistics, approximately 70% of Russia's population believe that they should be immediately censored and dispossessed. Acting on the basis of law, the president, the government, and the Russian prosecutor's office are attempting to investigate the activity of a number of oligarchs. They have declared war on the corruption, and it appears as though, over the next 4 years, the oligarchs may indeed be obliged to forfeit their financial holdings. Given the situation, they are naturally trying to get out of the country. But then there is the problem of how to legalize their transfer of capital to the West. The surest way is to provoke a kind of pogrom that will shock the world community. It's easy to see what happens next. The financial magnates simply turn up in one of the Western countries while these pogroms are going on and declare themselves political refugees. Naturally, this provides them with not only political asylum, but also a legislation of their financial holdings, even while they may still maintain at least partial control over resources and factories back home through dummy CEOs or trusted associates. And herein lies an important message for all Russian citizens, especially those organizations which call themselves patriotic. Don't ever give in to provocation or stoop to the level of organizing pogroms against synagogues. You will only be acting out somebody else's script. It would be wrong to accuse all Jews of machinations and unseemly acts. Just like Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians, Jews come in all stripes and colors. I offer the following as proof. I was once the featured speaker at a readers' conference in Kazan, where the audience was comprised of different nationalities, including many Muslims. During my remarks, I read a chapter from a book by the Jewish writer and poet Ephraim Kushner entitled A Bloodless Revolution. Before reading from it, I said that this was a Jewish writer living in Israel, but writing about Russia, about her future. When I had finished reading the chapter, the hall broke into thunderous applause. Muslims, too, applauded this Jewish writer and poet. Why? How did it happen that supposedly aggressive Muslims offered their sincere applause to a Jewish writer? Bunch of footnotes. Kazan, capital of the Republic of Tatarstan, about 1,000 kilometers east of Moscow. Ephraim Kushner, Jewish poet and writer who immigrated to Israel in 1990. The book mentioned was published in 2003, appeared in a Bulgarian translation in 2006, and includes favorable comments on the ideas set forth in the Ringing Cedars series. Another reference to Kushner may be found in footnote 14, book 4, Hope for the World. It happened because in his book he speaks out about the marvelous Russia of future, linking it to the ideas outlined in the Ringing Cedars series. He calls upon the Russian government to adopt a program based on these ideas. I can tell you right off that he is not the only Jew who accepts and supports Anastasia's concepts set forth in the books. In Israel, there is a whole club of readers who have been drawn to the books about this Siberian recluse. Israelis are composing songs both in Russian and Hebrew about the characters in this series. I have the distinct impression that in the final analysis, it will be the Jews who take the lead in putting the ideas into practice and will draw peoples of many lands along in their wake. I can at least tell you that I have been informed that right there in Israel, significant funds have been set aside for the construction of environmentally clean settlements. Oh, those connivers, people will say later on. See, they're stealing the Russian idea out from under us. Pardon me, but they are not stealing anything from us. In fact, they are saving this idea. Will you kindly tell me who is preventing Russian authorities from implementing the ideas in the books? After all, for the past 5 years, practically it seems the same authorities that have been targeted with a large number of individual and collective letters by Russians living in the Commonwealth of Independent States and elsewhere in the world. That these same authorities have been targeted. Okay. It is truly a comical situation that has developed. A host of researchers keep talking about the birth of a national idea among the Russian people, but the way things are turning out here, it looks as though it will have its first implementation in Israel. Who's to blame? Overall, every discussion on the Jewish question so far, at least those in the publications I have access to, seems pretty primitive. Almost all of them boil down to a routine statement of the facts. Jews have taken over the press in various countries. Pretty much all the TV networks are in Jewish hands. Most cash flow is controlled by the Jews. All this is no doubt true, including here in Russia today, but this is simply a statement of fact and nothing more. It is far more important to explain why situations like this have developed in various countries with an inviolable consistency over the period of centuries. I can tell you the following right off. It is simply that the Jews are obliged to do this, and we are obliged to fall in line with them, including on the legislative level. Judge for yourselves. The State Duma of the Russian Federation adopted a law recognizing 4 basic religions, 2 of which are Christianity and Judaism. According to Christianity, the Christian is the slave of God. Wealth is not welcome. In St. Petersburg, where I'm writing these lines, I can see from my hotel window the huge Orthodox Cathedral of the Blessed Virgin of Vladimir, on the facade of which is written in large gold lettering, "Hear, Our Lady, the prayer of thy slave." Footnote. Note that the Russian Orthodox Church traditionally refers to every human individual as a slave of God. It is reflected even in the contemporary Russian word for worker, which literally means father's slave. The term is generally translated to servant in the authorized version of the English Bible. Compare the wording of Daniel 9:17. O our God, hear the prayer of thy servant. Note too that this In this citation, the Russian term corresponding to Our Lady is Vladchitsia, which has the connotation of empress or high ruler. The Russian term corresponding to the Blessed Virgin of Vladimir, which translates to the Vladimir Mother of God. According to Judaism, the Jew is the chosen one of God. To him belong wealth and lands, and usury is welcome. Footnote, see Deut 23:20. Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury. Authorized King James Version. Rendered in the New English Bible as, you may charge interest on loan to a foreigner. Everybody knows what a huge influence religions exercise on man's mentality, character development, and way of life. Let us be consistent in the logic of our actions. The highest legislative organ of our land has accepted these two concepts, at the same time designating who is to be slave and who is to be ruler. And being the law-abiding citizens that we are, let us not keep deceiving each other, but let us accept as a given, according to the law adopted by our government, that the Jews have authority over us. Now there are some that will not be satisfied with such a position. Some will even consider such a statement absurd, but let us not close our eyes to the actualities of life. Let us see clearly the causes of what is going on, or we shall keep on tasting the consequences with unyielding regularity. If someone is unhappy over the current situation, then by all means let us work together to find an alternative. The solution might be an idea acceptable with equal enthusiasm to Muslims, Christians, Jews, and members of other faiths. Such an idea exists. Not only will it fix the situation, but it holds the future in its hands. There are specific facts and life situations that attest to this. Let's create. In an address to the Federal Assembly, the President of the Russian Federation set a goal of doubling the country's gross domestic product, or GDP, within 10 years. Footnote, Federal Assembly, the name given to the bicameral Russian parliament as a whole, which comprises the State Duma, or the lower chamber, and the Federation Council, the upper chamber, as established by the 1993 Constitution of the Russian Federation. While a goal is a goal, and measures must be taken to reach it, the first step is to inspire the people with a vision. It is the people, after all, who must do the work to double GDP indicators. And what has been happening since this goal was set by the highest official and the current government? Incredible events began to take place. Instead of at least making an attempt at realizing the goal, some highly placed officials began talking about how unfeasible its implementation was, while others insisted it still must be attained. And that's it. Nothing more. These discussions have wasted precious time. The year 2004 ended miserably with a GDP growth of a mere 6.4%. Right from the start, this fascinating subtext as to whether this goal was feasible or not ran throughout the whole treatment of the subject by the press, but again, with not even a single attempt at implementation. This situation points to the fact that the Russian authorities are heading for a state of utter helplessness, and it makes no difference here whether the officials in question are elected or unelected. They will find any excuse they can not to carry out the directive. Imagine how it would be if a commander-in-chief gave the order to prepare to attack, and his generals and colonels, instead of working out their plan of attack, began to discuss whether an attack was feasible or not. In that case, defeat would be an inevitability, which is exactly what has happened. But could it be possible that the goal set by the president was really preposterous? We can't judge until we try to figure it out for ourselves. However, I'll jump ahead of myself and say it is feasible. I can see my reader's dumbfounded reaction. What's all this about Russia's Orthodox Church, anti-sectarians, Western intelligence services, and the goal set by the president for doubling Russia's GDP? be patient. There is a very close mutual connection here. Think of who would benefit by a doubling of Russia's GDP. Russia herself, of course. Who would lose by it? Naturally, the West, which looks upon Russia merely as an overflow market with its substandard merchandise. And Western intelligence services, it seems, have once again had the upper hand as usual, putting down the Russian president and his officials, ridiculing them even as the aforementioned goal was being set. But let's go step by step. In order to double the overall GDP, gross domestic product, it is necessary to first identify those economic sectors where an increase in output is essential, as well as those where such an increase would be undesirable. The production of tobacco, wine, and spirits, for example. Russia is already drowning in her own booze and choking on her own tobacco smoke. You wouldn't want to double down on the output of armaments or build new casinos or double the outflow of raw materials from the country, which means that the remaining sectors of the economy are faced with the task of not just doubling but tripling or even quadrupling their output. These sectors have not yet been identified, and consequently, no specific goal has ever been suggested to them. Well, some may object, but we're not sure we can double our GDP or not. How can we even think in terms of quadrupling? An impossible task. But I say it is possible. It is possible, and not only that, but it requires no additional capital investment. Take agriculture, for example, where production has been cutting back year after year to the point where it has already begun to threaten national security. It is the talk of politicians, Duma deputies, and a number of governmental officials. But they're not talking in the wind. In the case of some food categories, imports already account for up to 40% of the market. That's already a threat to our national security. And what awaits us after that? I'll tell you. By 2005, our country's rural population is expected to shrink by 25%, which will exacerbate the problem even further. More specifically, it will make the country completely dependent on external sources, and then the government will be forced to pay for food, not just with natural resources, but through sales of missiles, just to avoid being utterly torn to pieces by the population at large. This means a sea change is required in the whole agriculture industry. It must double or even triple its production. However, this will never happen using traditional methods, where all proposals simply come down to nothing more than a requirement for additional subsidies. And it is not clear just who these subsidies are to be directed to, given that the able-bodied rural population keeps significantly decreasing in numbers. If that be the case, not even the most state-of-the-art equipment or super technology is going to help. There will simply be nobody left to work with it, which means that our goal is first and foremost to have able-bodied people. Where am I? Able-bodied people. Where are you? Showing up in the countryside. Millions of them. Tens of millions. Not only that, but they must be people with a desire to reach out and touch the ground with love. If they don't show up, there's no point in talking about anything else. To hear some officials tell it, however, getting people to show up like that would be nothing short of a miracle. It is not something they believe in. They haven't believed in it even when it's happened. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the miracle has happened. All thanks to one individual, the Siberian recluse named Anastasia. Maybe her words seem incredible and fantastical to some, but they are right on. They have given birth to an enduring impulsion in people's hearts and souls. Tens of thousands of people in various parts of the country have been wanting to chart their life course in a rural setting, to set up their domains there and move in. The number of applicants are rising with each passing year. They're setting up their own regional action groups and demanding, "Give us land. We are ready to take care of it." These people have united in a non-governmental organization which was founded at a conference in the city of Vladimir on the 5th of June 2004, an event which showed, for the first time in post-Soviet Russia, the rise of a popular force unparalleled in modern times. The hall was filled to capacity, as many came who were not registered delegates but simply wanted to listen and tune in to what was happening. By a vote taken at the conference, a people's movement was set up under the name Ringing Cedars of Russia, with the basic aim of supporting the idea of Kin's domains. It was truly a people's movement, opposed to neither the government nor any political party. Rather, it aimed to reach to all with the simple message, let's create. Thus, a people's movement was born with a clear and distinct program, easily comprehensible to and solidly supported by the public. What benefit would accrue to the state if Russia, by carrying out just one platform of this program? Outwardly, it is a very simple platform focusing on a single hectare of land, but envisaging the following wide-range results. A significant improvement in the environmental situation, restoration of soil fertility, a solution to the question of providing high-quality produce for the country's population, a significant twofold or threefold increase in wages across all sectors of the economy without risk of inflation, an immediate improvement in the demographic situation and in the general health of the population, including its rejuvenation, a solution to the question of the nation's defense preparedness, the termination of capital outflow, along with, by contrast, a capital inflow into Russia, the return of her intellectual resources, a significant reduction in, over the next few years, an eventual extirpation of bribery, corruption, gangsterism, and terrorism. A coming together of neighboring countries, along with those of the former Warsaw Pact, Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, and the 3 Baltic states, into a single powerful union. Footnote, neighboring states, primarily those of the Commonwealth of Independent States, made up of most of the republics of the former Soviet Union, Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, Kazakhstan, etc. And a cessation of the arms race and close cooperation among Russia, the USA, and Eastern Muslim states, MOSLEM. These points have been worked out not just by me, but also by a number of students in their graduating essays. For example, the essay of the budding jurist, Tatiana Borodina. Footnote, Ms. Borodina's graduating essay is entitled The Legal Status of Kin's Domains in Ukraine, Developmental Perspectives, and has been made available on a number of Russian websites. They are also talked about in scholarly publications. For example, Professor Viktor Yakovlevich Medikov. Footnote, a metallurgist and professor of economics, former vice rector of the Siberian Metallurgical Institute, who served as a deputy both in the Communist Supreme Soviet and in the first 2 terms of the post-Communist Duma. He gave the opening address at the June 2004 conference. Okay, where am I? What's happening? They're also talked about in scholarly publications. For example, Professor Viktor Medikov, a 3-term deputy of the Legislative Assembly who holds a doctorate in economics. There are a number of privately published brochures on the topic written by professional researchers as well as ordinary people. I shall attempt to jot down a few words of explanation in justification of some of these points. So let us suppose that our country has decided to implement the program proposed by Anastasia. Every willing family is offered free of charge 1 hectare of land for lifetime use with the right of inheritance for the purpose of establishing on it their own kin's domain. The produce grown on the domain as well as the domain itself is not subject to any taxation. The adoption of this program will lead to the following results: a significant improvement in the environmental situation. Practice has shown that people who have received land for a kin's domain, first of all, set about planting wild-growing trees at an average of up to 200 trees per family, along with an average of 2,000 shrubs, hedges, berry bushes, and 50 fruit-bearing trees. Even using the most conservative estimates, researchers predict that the adoption of such a program on a national level, if correctly implemented, will lead, right in its earliest stages, to about 10 million Russian families setting up their own kin's domains. This means that even in the first year or two of following the adoption of the program, and without any additional subsidies, 2 billion wild-growing trees have been planted, 20 billion shrubs, and approximately 50 million fruit-bearing trees. And that is just the beginning. Restoration of soil fertility, as can be seen from practice. The first thing people do when they are granted land, not on a short-term lease, but for their lifetime use, is to put their efforts into soil restoration. Not only that, but they are doing this not just by the application of organic fertilizers, but also by a more natural method, namely the sowing of soil-building crops during the early years. A solution to the question of providing high-quality produce for the country's population. You may remember the struggle for the harvest back in Soviet times, how school children, students, and individual employees were transported out to collective and state-owned farms to help bring in the harvest. Footnotes: struggle for the harvest, a term used in Soviet propaganda in reference to harvest time. Since collective farms were inherently inefficient, authorities were compelled to mount a campaign each year, urging a vast number of people, from school children to students to industrial workers and soldiers, to help with the harvesting and save the crops before they rotted in the field. People were generally expected to carry out this work without either with payment in kind or without any remuneration at all. Footnote: collective and state-owned farms, two systems of agricultural management during the Soviet era. On the collective farm, it was claimed that workers as a collective owned their farm, sold their produce to the state, and shared in the profits from the sale, while on a state-owned farm workers were paid a salary just as in a factory. In reality, however, in both cases, the quantities and prices were dictated by the state. I myself took part in these large-scale operations, weeding fields and gathering onions at a suburban state-owned farm. However, there was still no abundance of high-quality produce in the country. Today's older generations, of course, remember how the potatoes sold in stores would be half rotten, not to mention the most undesirable-looking vegetables. Then came the dacha movement. They began to allot people 600 square meters of land. A miracle happened. Everyone is aware of the statistics. Ordinary people, all by themselves, without any support from governmental ministries or agencies, have provided 80% of the vegetables produced in Russia. Unfortunately, all sorts of complications are being introduced these days, including higher travel fares, taxes on land plots, and increased electricity rates. And all this on just 600 square meters, where it is impossible to create any kind of economically viable enterprise, or to plant tall trees which enrich the soil, or to put in water ponds and so forth. And all this carried out by people without sufficient knowledge or experience, working just on weekends and on holidays. A hectare of land will allow the setting up of a more economically viable enterprise. With the right kind of organization, there will be a 30-fold decrease in the workload per square meter. Not all at once, mind you, but I do emphasize it has to be set up properly. That, given both existing practice and theoretical calculations, confirm that implementing the proposed program will fully guarantee the country a sufficient food supply for all its citizens, bar none. Now a word about quality. It goes without saying that someone growing agricultural produce to be used by his own family will not add poisonous chemicals or chemical fertilizers to the soil. He will not grow any mutant produce. All this crap is being imported into our country and bought by the public for no reason other than insufficient production here at home. Once a sufficient quantity level is reached, quality becomes the number one concern. I hope I've made myself clear. Footnote: the term dacha, originally from the verb devat, to give or to grant, dates back to at least the 11th century. It has had a variety of meanings, including country residences of the Russian cultural and political elite. From the 1940s on, with the emergence and rapid growth of food gardening by urban population, the term has been used more and more to denote a country garden plot belonging to a city dweller, usually together with a small cottage. The dacha movement referred to here arose during the Second World War, when the Soviet government began to allot small plots of land for food production to combat wartime food shortages, and has since grown to include approximately 20 million families. A significant 2- or 3-fold increase in wages across all the sectors of the economy without risk of inflation, and a reduction of prices within the country on all forms of merchandise, leading to a reduction in social tension. Someone may wonder what possible link there could be between the implementation of the Kin's-Domain program and a wage increase, let's say for a salesman, or a trolley bus driver, a nurse, or a teacher. But there is, and a direct causal link at that. Think about it. Most enterprises today are in private hands. People we call oligarchs enjoy fabulous profits, but at whose expense? Basically at the expense of minimum wage earners. And what's the point of increasing their wages, let's say from 5,000 to 20,000 rubles a month, when there are still people queuing up just to get a job? There's simply nowhere for them to go. Footnote: at the time this book was written, 2005, the average wage in Russia was 8,500 rubles per month, approximately equivalent to $300 at the official exchange rate, or $600 US in buying power. Wages vary greatly from one region to another, and full income amounts are often unreported, meaning the actual average is higher than that calculated by government agencies. It's an entirely different situation with a family whose work on their own domain earns them an average of 10,000 rubles a month, which has been proved entirely feasible in practice, with a minimal cost of living. No utility bills or daily commuting expenses, or the cost of buying meals at city cafes. To attract domain dwellers to work in a factory or other private enterprise, one would have to offer them a salary at least 1.5 or 2 times the income they would earn from working on the domain, and cover travel and meal expenses besides. Today, an oligarch who has privatized a factory or oil drilling company can afford to live in a castle in London, that really happens, and earn up to $1 million a month, while the workers slaving away to provide that income for him receive less than 0.1% of what he makes. Wow. This scenario can be played out ad infinitum. Inevitably, it leads to revolution, stripping of the property owner of his enterprises, and the overthrow of the government permitting such inequities. The only way to prevent such a result from occurring is to reach an equitable sharing arrangement with the workers. Oligarchs will not come to this point voluntarily, but under pressure of circumstances. will give in. We mentioned the relationship between a domain dweller and the owner of an industrial enterprise. But those left living in city flats will also see their wages rise to keep them at their jobs. They too, after all, are given a choice: stay working and living in urban conditions, or start building themselves a whole new way of life in the country. And one more question on this point: why will this not lead to inflation or price rises? Inflation is always the outcome of certain concrete procedures, especially engineered. Price rises are simply a byproduct. The cause is always man's estrangement from a natural way of life. It is an easier matter to increase prices on fuel and foodstuffs when people don't have any of either to call their own, meaning that they are completely dependent on external suppliers. But try raising apple prices for someone who owns his own orchard. Absurd. What about fuel? But even here, there's a limit. Today's fuel prices are so high that it is actually more profitable to till a couple of hectares of land using horses, which, by the way, supply a first-class fertilizer for the soil. An immediate improvement in the demographic situation and in the general health of the population, including its rejuvenation. It is no secret that the current demographics in our country are catastrophic, and even this word isn't strong enough to fully describe it. If a country's peacetime population decreases by almost 1 million souls annually, that is monstrous. The leaders of such a country, I should think, would want to hide their identity from the public as well as from their descendants. Discussion on the need to change the current situation amount to nothing more than a pathetic babble. They don't change anything, not even increasing financial support for birthing mothers, as necessary as that may be, will lead to any substantial improvement. The history of many millennia shows that women cease giving birth when they see no prospective future for their children. It is necessary first to determine clearly and precisely the future development of society as a whole, as well as of each family making up that society. The Anastasia Foundation in Vladimir conducted a survey of families planning on setting up their own kins domains. Footnote: the Anastasia Foundation for Culture and Assistance to Creativity, a nonprofit organization based in the city of Vladimir. See Book 5, Chapter 15. Of the more than 2,000 polled, 1,995 responded that they would be having children. Some wanted 3 or even more. Those who, for health reasons, were unable to have children of their own were planning to adopt them from orphanages. How to explain this phenomenon? It is simply that a man who has built a marvelous living oasis is aware that he is building something lasting and wants his children to enjoy life too. As to rejuvenation and revitalization of health, let us turn once more to practice. Look at how much livelier and younger your grandfathers and grandmothers behave once they get out to their dachas in the springtime. And it goes without saying that a pregnant woman who eats only environmentally clean produce, drinks clean water, and breathes clean air cannot help but bear healthy children, significantly healthier than today's examples. A solution to the question of the nation's defense preparedness, a significant reduction in weapons, and, over the next few years, the eventual complete extirpation of bribery, corruption, gangsterism, and terrorism. The military's preparedness and morale of our armed forces today include the nation's law enforcement officers, has slipped below the 0 mark and is heading deep into the minus side. It is no secret how challenging it is for local conscription offices to call up young recruits to military service. Refusal of military obligations is no longer considered shameful among today's youth. On the contrary, it has become a mark of bravery. Those whose families are slightly better off attempt to buy their way out of serving. Those not so well off try to cut out any way they can, even to the point of self-mutilation. Footnote: by law, military service is compulsory for all male Russian citizens upon reaching the age of 18. So it turns out that, by hook or by crook, the army drags its conscripts from the poorest segments of the population. Such an army is in no position to defend anyone or anything against a major enemy. Not only that, but it is potentially dangerous to the very country it is supposed to serve. Let's take a closer look at just whom the soldiers of the Russian army are called upon to protect. The motherland, comes the standard response. But today the concept of motherland has been seriously eroded, and it is a challenge to grasp a hold of just what is one's motherland. It wasn't long ago that Russian officers and soldiers swore an oath of allegiance to the USSR, which was also considered their motherland. Then all at once the borders were changed, and whole parts of the territory they were defending turned out to be foreign soil. The troops deployed in these parts were suddenly treated as invaders. They were left to defend the people on the part of the territory that was still known as Russia. But what kind of people were they really protecting? Oligarchs and bribe-taking government officials? Their own families? But if a soldier or an officer came from a poor family, who is he supposed to protect them from? For the past 10 years now, government propaganda has proclaimed that we are building a civilized democratic state on the Western model. But just think, how could today's Russian soldiers do battle against forces of NATO or the USA if they already have been brainwashed into thinking that their enemy is civilized and developed, which must mean that we, by contrast, are uncivilized and undeveloped? Quite absurd. Is this some sort of psychobabble or a deliberate, invented tactic? An all-professional army has been touted as a panacea for getting out of this manufactured dead-end situation. But that is even more absurd. A professional army, as is known, is made up of mercenaries who take up arms for money and shoot at whoever they are told is the target. They carry out the orders of whoever pays the most. History is full of examples of governments afraid to bring their armies of mercenaries home. That's how it was in ancient Rome, and a similar danger exists in the USA. It is already happening in parts of Russia as well. A professional army must be kept busy in continual fighting, preferably not on the territory of the nation it is supposed to be serving. When an army returns to its home country, it will inevitably be in demand by forces opposed to the existing authority, or it will disintegrate into a large number of splinter groups, some of which may be transformed into criminal gangs. For the most part, there is no such thing as unemployed armed mercenaries. If they are not given work, they will find it on their own, and in their chosen profession. Besides, an army consisting of people serving only for money can be very easily bought off by the highest bidder. Just imagine a foreign military base located, say, in Georgia, Turkmenistan, or the Ukraine, whose soldiers are paid $3,000 a month, while ours get only $500 a month. In fact, you don't need to imagine this. There are already concrete examples right here in Russia. Just look at how many highly qualified and professionally trained officers of the former KGB are now working as security guards for commercial organizations, including foreign banks. So what's the solution? There is just one and only one. We must make sure that our Russian soldiers, officers, and generals have something left to protect. Every Russian army or law enforcement officer, upon receiving the rank of lieutenant, is to be awarded not only a little star on his epaulette, but at the same time, the right to receive a hectare of land on which to set up his kin's domain. The land grants shouldn't be for backlot wastelands, but for elite lands, especially allocated by the government for settlement purposes. An officer should be able to choose his own particular hectare within these territories, and when home on leave, he should be free to plant, either alone or together with his parents, a new garden, or dig a pond, or designate a spot on which to build a house. And if he is frequently reposted to various parts of the country or even abroad, during the time he is billeted in officers' quarters, barracks, or a field tent, every officer of the Russian army should be able to rest secure in the knowledge that back there, in a spot of his own choosing, the garden of his little motherland, his own garden, is flourishing in the springtime. And the girl who has fallen in love with him will know from the little star on his epaulettes that her beloved has a future, has a motherland, and a family nest for their future children. And even if, for the time being, she has to share with her beloved in the challenging conditions of an officer's life, all the same, at least once a year, they will visit their little motherland and share their dreams and plans for the future domain. They will decide where the pond is to be dug and where the house is to be built. Even if they are obliged to spend their month's leave on their own land in a tent, still, they will be able to experience an incomparable sense of joy at beholding the marvelous future that lies ahead for the generations of their family to come. And even if the little trees of their future garden are still young, and the green hedge they have planted around their domain is scarcely noticeable, these are still there, and they will grow and flourish, waiting for them, their creators. If an officer's wife becomes pregnant, within 3 months' time, the state should build on the designated spot a modest home according to the plans selected by the parents-to-be, with all the amenities afforded by modern technology. And the wife of a Russian officer will be able to spend the remaining months of her pregnancy in her own little house. Perhaps her home will be shared by her parents, or perhaps she will be alone there, keeping in touch with friendly neighbors. But most importantly, she will be surrounded and filled by the positive emotions she so badly needs. After all, she will be completely surrounded by the space of her little motherland, belonging jointly to her and her beloved. She won't go off to have her baby overseas, or even in one of those incubators we are accustomed to calling, for some reason, maternity homes. The officer's wife will have her baby in her own domain, as many women are already doing. Possibly it will be under a doctor's supervision, but it will be at home in a familiar, favorable, and sympathetic surrounding area, not in some maternity chair which has heard the moans and cries of hundreds of birthing mothers. The child of a Russian officer should be born only in his own family domain. Even if at the moment of birth the young lieutenant is somewhere far away, he will most certainly hear his child's first joyful cry, and he will let no foe encroach upon his grand motherland. He, this young lieutenant, a Russian officer, will not let a foe get past him, since at the heart of his vast motherland is his own little motherland, one he feels is very dear and close to him, one where his beloved walks in a flourishing garden, holding his wee son by the hand as he takes his own first baby steps in life. Society, our society, the society comprising our nation, is already today capable of seeing to it that a young mother, the wife of a Russian officer, need not worry about how to get food for her baby. She should be provided for. Maybe not in the style the oligarchs' wives are accustomed to, nor has she any use for the shallow fad of owning a supposedly expensive car. She will have far more than that. Love and a future. Her main achievement is the restoration of her motherland. This is her principal work, her principal task in life. And society should pay her a salary equal to that of her husband. That's not much, of course, in return for her grand co-creation, but such a step will at least be an initial goodwill gesture on the part of society and the state. Such a possibility already exists right now. Only one shouldn't confuse things by bringing in higher-level economics considerations. Currently, the oil pipeline is showering Russia with a rain of American dollars. And why is not a single drop of this rain falling on any Russian officer, on his wife or his child, or his little motherland? Who thought up such arrangements, concealing themselves behind the supposed panacea for all ills? Democracy. Is it democratic when poorly paid officers or soldiers of the Russian army are obliged to defend wealthy oligarchs, their fancy detached houses along the Roblevskoy Highway, and their numerous counterparts in the regions of the country? That's not democracy. That's drivelocracy. Footnote: Rublevskaya Highway, named for the former village of Rublyov, though, oh my god, I don't know. An area in the western part of Moscow where many of Russia's riches have built or bought expensive apartments, or what used to be a rarity in Moscow, detached single-family homes. If such drivel doesn't change, we shan't have any defense or protection at all. There will be no protection for the average citizen, or even for the president, let alone the petty and major oligarchs. The extermination of this drivel will spell an end to corruption, drug trafficking, and the notorious bribe-taking from drivers on the part of traffic cops. Now tell me, why should a copper have to stand in the street and breathe into his lungs all the roadway dust and the exhaust fumes of all the expensive and not so expensive cars passing by, as though they were the cat's pajamas and he were nothing but a nincompoop? He stands there, watching out for their safety, for which he has paid a mere pittance. Indeed, if he didn't take the bribes from these cars' owners, he would be ridiculed by his relatives, who would think it utterly abnormal. His wife would tear into him, and his children would turn away from their father, who couldn't even afford to buy them a pair of the last season's jeans. And he is not at all terrified of the police's anti-corruption squads. So what if he's sacked from his job? That's no great loss. It's not a job that will guarantee It's not a job that will guarantee a living for his family in return for honest labor. It simply means he has to go look for another. But what kind of job? What kind of job can he find where he can maintain his integrity and still provide for his family? And so he stands there in the dust and exhaust fumes and takes his bribes. And for this, society hardly condemns him, but pays him. So what? We're all becoming like this, society thinks. Now that is terrifying. The fact that we are getting used to it. We cease dreaming about other possible scenarios. We get accustomed to seeing crowds of prostitutes, homeless children, and street thugs. We get accustomed to the stage shows that we call elections. Or is someone, in fact, accustoming us to these? After all, up until recently, the most terrifying thing for an inhabitant of a Russian village was social disdain on the part of his fellow villagers, observing, "She's a slut," or "He hasn't kept his property up." And so it's time to bring back those days. The time will most certainly come when the most pleasant thing for a Russian citizen to hear will be society's approval in the form of, "He's a good man. He has sensitive and properly behaved children. He has a splendid domain." Then there will not be any more crime, corruption, or drug trafficking. It will surely come, that time. On a bench in a shady garden sits a graying elderly man, tenderly stroking the chestnut-colored hair of his 3-year-old granddaughter, her head nuzzled against his chest, while his 11-year-old grandson takes the general's great coat hanging on the back of the bench and tries it on. 2 large general stars adorn the epaulettes of the great coat, which once featured 2 small lieutenant's stars. But that's not the most important thing, the gray-headed general thinks, looking at his grandchildren. The most important thing is that he created and saved for his grandchildren this garden, this pond, and the whole marvelous space in his kin's domain, his little motherland in the heart of Russia. He has saved Russia. She is flourishing, his motherland. A fresh, cool breeze wafts the fragrance of her gardens around the whole world, and interplanetary winds announce the flourishing of the earth to other worlds, and the stars in the heavens burn with just a touch of envy and dream of meeting visitors from the earth, the wise and bright sons and daughters of God. It will come to pass. But in the meantime, do you hear, lieutenants, how the heart of the Russian land is beating, sounding the alarm, how it is begging for you to take her little by little to yourself and plant gardens? She promises to return each of you your spaces of paradise and give you the gift of eternity. Do you hear? You must hear. The termination of capital outflow on a new inflow of capital into Russia, the return of her intellectual resources. I can theoretically prove that this will happen with the adoption of Anastasia's program in fall. This has been shown theoretically by famous scholarly researchers as well as by students working on their graduating essays. There are arguments on both sides here. Only practice can offer incontrovertible proof, and that it has done. People of the Russian diaspora have been flocking from near and far to communities still under construction, communities which, as yet, do not have a solid legal footing. I know, for example, just in one community near the city of Vladimir, of a teacher from Turkmenistan and a young couple from America. A similar trend can be observed in many other communities now being built on the territory of Russia and Ukraine. People who can't wait for a new law on land grants are buying up land, endeavoring to work within existing legislation. They are buying back their motherland. It is the duty of society and the state to refund their money. Otherwise, there will be a curse hanging over the head of anyone who has seen fit to take money from someone for starting to settle on land where he was born. In any event, people are coming back, even if it is just one or two at a time for now. You can judge for yourselves what will happen under a favorable coincidence of circumstance, i.e., the adoption of a law granting every willing family a plot of land on which to set up a kin's domain. Letter to the Russian President from Germany. Administration Office, President of the Russian Federation. The words, I don't know. Dear President of Russia, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. This is a letter from the former citizens of a country which no longer exists, the USSR. For various reasons, many of us find ourselves living abroad. Germany has become a refuge for more than 3 million former Soviet citizens. While flocking over the border and discovering the Western civilized paradise, many of us have recognized that at the same time we have lost our motherland, without which no one can ever be happy. I'm sorry. I'm gonna read that over. While flocking over the border and discovering the Western civilized paradise, many of us have recognized that at the same time we have lost our motherland, without which no one can ever be happy in the fullest sense. Today in Russia, a brand new idea has made its appearance, guaranteeing man's physical and mental health. An idea already appealing to many people of various nationalities, including those living in Western Europe. Thanks to this idea, we realize that right now it is Russia that possesses the spiritual potential need for the rebirth of harmonious man and the restoration of a harmonious state. Detailed information about this idea is available in the Ringing Cedar series by Vladimir, which to date has sold almost 6 million copies overall. It is Megre's books that have given Russians living in the Commonwealth of the independent states and other countries, a new and marvelous hope of rebirth, which is a vital need for every man, family, and state. The substance of the idea can be summed up as follows. Every family or citizen should have the right to receive, free of charge, 1 hectare of land on which to set up their little motherland, their family domain, which can be passed down by inheritance from generation to generation. Man was born on the land and should have his own specific piece of his motherland, created and cultivated with his own hands, in the hands of several generations of his family. In one of your speeches, you stated that Russia was born and long lived in the countryside, on the land, and that is its destined path. We agree. Having tasted the pleasures of Western civilization, we are acutely aware that drug trafficking, prostitutions, the plight of homeless children, thievery, and murder are all the fruits of this same celebrated civilization. We are not even mentioning the most painful European problems, namely the environment and demographics. Russia, too, has been experiencing these same problems in trying to reinvent itself on the Western model. Today, it is becoming clear to many in the West that the path being followed by their democratic states is leading to a dead end, if not utter self-destruction. Russia has gone through difficult trials over many centuries of its history, all of which have served to nurture a spirit among its people. It is thanks to this spirit that at times of the most despairing spiritual and environmental crises, its citizens will be able to stand on the edge of the abyss and, despite everything, not only give birth to a new national idea, grow new life, but also to head off the catastrophe of self-destruction which threatens all of mankind. We, as former citizens of the USSR, are fully aware of what is meant by the simple concept of motherland. Whether we have taken out foreign citizenship or not, many of us have realized that our hearts and our souls remain in the places we lived for most of our lives. We would like to return to Russia and start creating our family domains, establishing new style communities. The activity of setting up a family domain will lead to an improvement in the quality of life for the whole commonwealth of people. We realize that a lot depends on us, on our labors, our capabilities, our experience. Many of us have taken on new professions in Europe. We have studied foreign languages. Some of us have started our own businesses. There are quite a few of us who have begun studying the experience of Western eco-villages and non-traditional methods of farming. In our communities, we shall build our own schools, clubs, and hospitals. There may not be a need for special government subsidies, as our numbers include all sorts of experts, and we are prepared and able to seek out our own financing and opportunities. This kind of activity will lead to a fundamental improvement in the lives of the great commonwealth of people. Lands that have been used, abandoned, or lain waste up until now will become fruitful orchards, and on them will be born new generations of Russians with a new consciousness, with a new feeling for and outlook on the world. Moreover, we all desire to assist our relatives and family members now living in Russia or the Commonwealth of Independent States. This will also help solve the problems faced by youth, the jobless, and the homeless. We are prepared right at this very moment to muster the forces of several generations of our families and also put our capabilities, experience, knowledge, and financial resources toward the goal of co-creating a proud, majestic, and mighty motherland of Russia. To implement this idea, we ask your consideration of the following questions. 1. Every willing family or individual citizen should be granted the right to receive at no charge 1 hectare of land for lifetime use with the right of inheritance, but with no right to sell, whereon to create a family domain. 2. Simplification of the procedures to obtain Russian citizenship on the part of those who wish to create their own little motherland and a vast Russia, who were born on the territory of the RSFSR or of other erstwhile Soviet republics and who formerly held citizenship in the USSR. Faithfully and respectfully, future citizens of Russia. Germany, 160 signatures. Footnote: RSFSR, abbreviation for Russian Soviet Federated Socialist Republic, or the part of the USSR that after its formal disintegration became known as the Russian Federation. This letter, unfortunately, met no reply at all from Russia, not even a simple pro formula memo from some kind of official was received in response. The Russian-speaking community in Germany has in their possession a postal confirmation to the effect that the administrative office of the Russian president indeed received their letter. You know, this lack of response is already becoming a pattern. It's not just you, but we who are living here in Russia too, and we aren't getting any reply either. On the internet site of the Anastasia Foundation, there's a whole section full of letters, some of them written in English, including letters addressed to the president of Russia. For 5 years now, people have been writing on one and the same topic, Kins domains, but to date there has not been a single reply, either to individually or collectively written letters. Footnote: even more tellingly, during President Putin's major internet conference on July 6, 2006, over 10,000 conference participants asked or voted for questions specifically dealing with the allocation of land for Kins domains. The 7 most popular questions on the topic of agriculture, which the government declares to be a high priority, were all about the allocation of land for Kins domains. President Putin chose to answer a wide variety of questions, including, for example, at what age did you first have sexual intercourse? But not a single question on Kins domains. 4 days later, Russia's leading business journal expert commented that this particular internet conference served as a good indication of the most burning issues in Russian society today, and observed that allocation of land for Kins domains was among them. As you will soon realize, it couldn't be any other way, since here in Russia there are forces which have pegged themselves higher than the president or the government. They believe themselves to be higher than the people too, only I think this is an ill-founded belief. Of course, one can rise higher than a drunken people, but there is not and cannot be any power higher than a people in whose hearts lives not only a dream of the future, but a burning desire to put such a dream into practice. It behooves me to respond to you, dear former fellow citizens, on behalf of our government officials, on behalf of the president. First of all, I must thank you, people, you who now live in Germany, America, Israel, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Italy, and France, Georgia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, and even Mongolia. It is thanks to your efforts that these books about Anastasia have been translated and published in the countries where you are now residing. I didn't know you personally, so I was unable to ask you to do this, but there is something I do know. I know how your hearts have been touched, and how you went about approaching publishers and translators, and when you did not find a reciprocal understanding, you set about translating and publishing my books yourselves. This happened, for example, in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, Canada, and America. And finally, you found some understanding. I felt this for the first time in Germany when I addressed readers conferences in Berlin and Stuttgart. Sitting together in the overflowing auditorium were Russian speakers who had immigrated to Germany from Russia and native German speakers who had no knowledge of Russian in roughly equal numbers. I knew the two groups didn't get along that well, but here they were sitting side by side and good-naturedly trying to explain to one another the translation from the Russian, which was, I'm sure, not always understandable. I used to consider Germans pedantic and not a strongly emotional people, but life has shown me otherwise. It was none other than a German farmer who, after reading about Anastasia, got into his car and drove all the way to Siberia. He went knowing neither the language, nor the Russian road system, neither the Russian traffic police, nor the weather. He got there. He returned home with Russian souvenirs for his friends. My great gratitude naturally goes out to all those who, at their own initiative, and sometimes at their own expense, have translated and published the books abroad. But the books, after all, are not the most important thing. Something else is. Thank you all for your understanding and support of the ideas and dream that have come out of Siberian Russia. Now this dream is no longer just a Russian dream. Now it is yours as well, in equal measure. May you succeed in preserving it, putting it into practice, and passing it on to be perfected by your children. It is hard to tell who has performed the most significant service. Anastasia, with her impassioned sayings, the books themselves, or all those who have seized upon the idea and carried the torch forward. Anastasia has said, "I give the whole of my soul to people. In people I shall prevail through my soul. Prepare yourself, all wickedness and evil-mindedness, to leave the earth." Quoted from Book 3, Chapter 24. I thought these were just simple words. However, life has shown me that they are not simple at all. Anastasia's dream has been lit with tiny sparks in the hearts of millions of people scattered across the globe, people of many different nationalities and faiths. This dream is no longer just her dream. It belongs to many people and will not fade. It is now the dream of the ages and of eternity.